Well, thank you for that intro and that welcome. And also hearing all the illustrious folks that have come and spoken with you folks before. It's a tough act to follow, but I'm hoping to do it. I just flew in from San Francisco yesterday, ground zero of a lot of this AI stuff, and it's fantastic that I get to talk to a group that gets tech, not just gets tech, but is really in the center of the next story. And what I'm gonna do to kind of, in return, essentially, for this invitation to come down here is to try to talk to you about what's going to happen in the next 25 years with tech. 3 world historical technologies I'm going to lay out here are going to drive what I would make the case for is going to be a great era of progress. It's far from the gloom and doom that you're hearing in media now. But I think we're really actually, there's many, many reasons to be optimistic, and I'm going to kind of run through a bunch of ideas and slides that are going to help stretch your thinking and kind of get you thinking to start off this conference. Now, I mentioned that I just came from San Francisco. I mean, I think folks are going to see the arrival of generative AI, which frankly has only been out for 2 years now, as a world historical moment. I really think it is really going to mark the arrival of a truly transformative technology. It has, in some ways, what generative is doing is, we've had AI before, but it's been very focused, it's been very targeted. You had to have all the kind of resources with data scientists and coders to kind of focus on one thing like search or something that you could do through Google. But what this did is it opened AI up to everyone. It was really the ability to kind of, just through talking, anybody, anywhere, to actually harness this incredible power of technology. It reminded me, similar to what I actually saw and lived through in the early days of Wired magazine there, was essentially we had the internet before the early 90s, but it was really the opening up the internet through the web that made it available to everybody that led to the explosion of kind of innovation that actually has really created our world in the last 25 years here. Very many interesting parallels. I actually go further and say it's really that we're actually crossing the threshold into an AI age. The AI age is beginning. I use the word age deliberately. When we use the word age and kind of talking about humans, we kind of entered the Bronze Age. We learned how to work with metals. When you get into a different age, it's essentially a step change in our abilities, and it essentially opens up a technology that humans will use forever after. There's no going back to the pre-age. And I think that's really what we're seeing here. We're in the very early ages of thinking that humans are going to be working with AI for centuries. That just gives you a sense of the impact here. It is happening, I would say, ground zero up in San Francisco, where I've been for the last 30 years, since the early Wired magazine, working with the founders there. And just about the time when everyone kind of says, everyone's leaving San Francisco's so over. That's the East Coast media loves to do that to us about every 5 years or so. But of course, far from that, it was actually we were laying the groundwork for what is, I think, going to be the biggest technological revolution, dwarfing, I think, what happened in the internet, which is going to roll out here in the next 25 years. I, in fact, happened as soon as ChatGPT 4 actually popped out in about March of 23, I started a series in San Francisco called The AI Age Begins, because this had been such a surprising development for so many people that we would pose a question every night, and I'd get a dozen experts to kind of hit on the question. And then we'd invite about 250 people, invite only folks that had some insight into the question. And we'd have this kind of incredible kind of conversation, which, by the way, is videoed. You can get it through YouTube in many ways. But anyhow, there is, and also through Substack. But the reason I'm kind of saying that is I've been actually for the last 2 years gathering some of the top experts in AI to really parse out what's happening here. So what I'm talking to you about today, it's not just going to be about an AI, by the way, but what I am talking to you is a synthesis of what I'm learning from everybody else. So for example, here's anyone who has an Apple and is talking to Siri. This is Adam Cherry, who's the co-founder of Siri, which Steve Jobs had the vision to buy early on. But Adam said, and this is one of my gatherings there, he said, I've been working for almost 40 years in AI and more than 30 years in conversational AI. And I am one of those who say, I never thought I would see what's happened in this last year in my lifetime. This is a very common thing. Many AI experts I knew did not think they would see this kind of level of development in their lifetimes. They said eventually humans would get to it. But it's a very consistent thing through so many different people. Here's another woman who not only was running a lot of their AI labs up in Amazon, but also was a former patent officer, or running the patent office, Michelle Lee. And she said, even before the announcement of the ChatGPT back in November last year, I was a believer that artificial intelligence is the most transformative technology of our generation. She means of our time. By the way, there's me, kind of the host behind there, trying to orchestrate this. And here's Greg Corrado, who really is probably one of the top dozen people in the world around AI. He's the co-founder of Google Brain Team, and he also is now focused on the implications in biotech. But he said, I feel there hasn't been a moment that I've been alive where there was a larger space of possibilities that have just come up over the horizon that have come up in the last year or so. So what I'm saying to you folks here in tech is, yes, this is a big deal. We are walking through an incredible moment here. And you are really playing a big part of that with your data centers and all the things tied into kind of creating the infrastructure essentially for this. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about is this thing called The Great Progression. It's a magazine piece, came out about 2 years ago, literally 2 months before the arrival of ChatGPT 3.5 in November. So it's September of 2 years ago, literally about right now. The Great Progression, hot, popular kind of magazine piece, 10,000 word piece. Got a lot of interest at the time. By the way, you can Google it, it's out there. But the idea about this magazine piece was to kind of counter the gloom and doom of what was so much of the media and so much of our culture is just so mired in kind of depression and existential dread and all kinds of stuff. And to say, folks, I think it's a completely, very, very different kind of future that we're heading into here. And one of the reasons I kind of do this, the driver of this kind of story, is that we're walking through 3 world historical technologies, meaning technologies that people for the rest of human history will look back on as kind of key, fundamentally game-changing technologies. One is AI. I made the case for that quickly. The other one is the arrival of clean energy with renewables and all that, but also there's a kind of nuclear version of that we can get into. But essentially, we are crossing the threshold into essentially an era of clean technology. Now, the reason I'm saying this is a game changer is technology, our energy is now going from a commodity, something coal, oil, whatever, you dig it out of the ground, to a technology, which is like solar, batteries, and kind of, so that once you move an energy into a technology, you can constantly improve it, you can manufacture it at scale, you can bring the cost down in ways that a commodity just fluctuates up and down. It's a huge game changer. Humans have never had that kind of energy source, and now we have that. And then the third one is bioengineering, our mastery of genetic engineering, which is now starting to happen, our understanding of biology. We are going to basically engineer life. We have the capability to do it. We're increasingly going to get good at it, and it's going to be a fundamentally new technology. Before this, humans had no clue how to do any 3 of these, and now going forward, we do. So essentially, what we're doing is we're going not just an AI age opening up, but we're walking a clean energy age is opening up, meaning we're not going to go back to carbon energy after this. Once we kind of understand how to do this at scale and get abundant clean energy, we're just going to keep charring ahead. And the same thing, once we understand how to really engineer life, living things, plants, animals, and even to some extent being able to tweak our own biology, we're not going back. And these are 3 super big deals. Now, there's such a deal, I use this word step change, and I want to kind of talk to you about how big a deal this is that for all the innovation and technology we've seen over the years, there's some that stand out are bigger than others. And that's a lot of times we talk about as general purpose technologies, which is technologies that are applicable in so many different directions that they essentially fundamentally change what humans are able to do. They lift us up to another level, essentially, of ability. And again, it gives us something that who knew beforehand we'd never knew how to do. Now this, literally, when historians of technology talk, they talk about roughly 25 of these game-changing general purpose technologies, like the wheel, the printing press, electricity. Well, we're actually, these ones I'm talking to you now are in that league. We're in that kind of play at that league. And in fact, the AI one, I think, is worth saying it's even a more special one in some ways. Because essentially these step changes, if you think about most of human history before the Enlightenment, humans kind of had, let's say, could augment their physical power with like hanging onto an animal and dragging a plow with a horse or something. But it wasn't until the Enlightenment and the early Industrial Revolution that we figured out, hey, we could get a machine to augment our physical power so that can be like 200 horses pulling us. And in fact, that was a game changer that essentially led to the Industrial Revolution, the spread of prosperity. A lot of what the world that we live in today, all the institutions around that are kind of built on that core step change in our abilities. But here's the thing, up until now, anything to do with intelligence, meaning intelligence is like you can sense the world around you, you have to make reasonable kind of guesses on what's happening around you, can make decisions around that stuff. Anything to do with intelligence had to have a human with it associated with it. Even something simple like collecting cash at a toll booth or something. But in fact, what's happened recently in targeted things, let's say toll booth, we figured out how to automate that with a kind of a targeted AI, you could say now, reading license plates and doing that. But essentially what we're doing now with this generative AI is essentially we're opening up intelligence. We are now entering an era of intelligent machines. So now we are amplifying or augmenting our intelligence, something that we've never been able to do before. And now we can do it, and we can do it in every direction. It's not just one industry is going to benefit from it. It's just not one segment of society. It's going to be a transformative technology applied to everything, which is why there's so much excitement around this. But again, there are other categories. When you think of, let's say, the Enlightenment, which was a step, really a huge moment. This is like, let's say, the founding fathers of America, that kind of era. Also European Enlightenment. But there was big changes to like communication with the printing press. And then there's big changes in energy. At that time was coal. We were able to harness coal for the first time. And production with those machines. So I mentioned like these things were giving us those step changes back then, which we've built a lot of the modern life. But today we're in all three of these same categories. Communication, you can think of AI as a communications technology, like simultaneously translating all languages right now. Even right now it's good. It's going to get even better than that. But also energy, I just mentioned the clean energy thing, and also production, how biological engineering is going to supersede kind of digging stuff out of the ground and do the industrial production over time. So when I talk about this thing about what a big deal our area is, things like when we introduced electricity, man, we took like 40 years to figure it out. And then the car revolution after the war, we kind of had to work with that. I'll return to that later. The digital revolution that we've all kind of lived through the last 40 years since the PC was introduced and the internet introduced, that's been going on. But what we're hitting now are a triple whammy step changes, three at the same time, and that's what I call the Great Progression, because it holds the keys to a lot of progress potentially here. Now, once you get those kind of game-changing technologies in the mix, what's going to do is it starts to kind of transform the systems that have been built around previous technologies, and they also start to introduce tensions and new kind of possibilities with the systems that are starting to emerge. And so basically, for anyone in this room like my era, who is kind of the last 40 years, you could say, we've had one mega system in the world made up of subsystems. And roughly, if you had to think about it from the eyes of the US, for example, or the West, our meta challenge was terrorism. And for the last 40 years, I mean, we had 2 wars in the Middle East, all that stuff. Our energy was completely carbon. Our transportation, all about the internal combustion engine, period. The culture was dominated by the boomers, the baby boomer, the biggest generation we've seen since up until that time. The politics, honestly, was generally conservative for a bunch of reasons, but also that the boomers were generally a more conservative crew. Our economics was unleashing the private sector. Capitalism was all about shareholder value. The work was 100% physical, knowledge work or physical work. You had to go someplace. Production was industrial. And geopolitics was all about the Middle East because we had to keep the oil going to kind of keep the whole flywheel going. This is a world essentially that everyone gets. We understand that. Politicians have answers. Journalists know how to talk about that. That world is breaking down. That is increasingly coming under stress, not working. All this kind of, a lot of the trauma we're feeling right now is that stuff is starting to really be kind of seen as a past. What's fascinating about this juncture, though, is every one of these has a kind of a nascent system that's starting to emerge here, just not as clearly as the old system that's just crystal clear, was crystal clear. For example, now our new meta challenge is climate change. Energy is shifting rapidly to clean. We're going to talk about this. Transportation is rapidly going to electric. We're watching a culture much more dominated by the millennials, the children of the boomers, and by now the biggest generation of history here. Politics, I would just say, without getting into partisan kind of stuff, I would think some of the characteristics of politics are going to probably get a little more progressive, partly driven by these younger generations. Economics will probably have a bigger role for the public sector, I would argue, just preparing you to think about this. We'll get into it a little bit later. Capitalism is now, we're all trying to figure out what all the stakeholders are kind of in that. That's a lot of the work now is virtual since the pandemic. We're trying to figure out how that works. Production is going to be more biological, although that's taking a little more time. That's not immediately obvious. Geopolitics is now geared to China, Asia, and kind of partly because those are the big populations that have to be dealt with to solve climate change on the planet. And so what I would argue is these are all the nascent systems that are kind of emerging. They're nascent, they're not fully understood. And so what we're kind of living through here in the 20s particularly is essentially the tension between this thing happening right now. It's surfacing in our politics, literally our politics now, not just here, but in the West. It's because there's an old world with a lot of kind of people rooted in an old kind of system, very fearful of the future, and people that are kind of just trying to figure out all the benefits and positive possibilities of the future. Now, you say, why would you listen to this guy? Well, one of the things is in the mid-90s, when we were in a very kind of similar situation to what we were with the internet in that case, I co-authored a book, basically a cover story in Wired called The Long Boom, looking out the next 25 years from the mid-90s, saying, hey, this is probably what's going to happen, breathing life into a lot of the positive things that were going to come, because people are still like, oh, that's goofy things. What's an Amazon? They're never going to amount to anything. All kinds of stuff. And went into a book, went into multiple languages, as they mentioned on that intro. But what's interesting is a lot of things we projected out from that time actually happened. Moore's law kept going. This is a logarithmic chart for all the engineers here, kind of understand that. But, this would be a skyscraper in terms of how fast, how the doubling power of computers went up. Same thing with the cost came down dramatically. And actually, since you guys are storage dudes, you probably remember, some of you might remember this, but a gigabyte, in 1980, a gigabyte cost $700,000. Just think about that, folks. It's like a penny today, right? And again, this is a log chart, so it'd be like leaping off a skyscraper is a better way to understand this thing. Growth of people in the middle of that. When we were writing this piece, there's 25 million people on the internet. And we said, hey, basically everyone's going to be connected. And by 2020, we were 60%. We're getting close to 70 now, and that's going to totally fill out shortly here. Apple was broke. When that cover story came out, Apple was in the midst of begging Steve Jobs to come back because they were 3 months from bankruptcy. And of course, once Jobs got a second shot at it, it became the first trillion-dollar company in the world. There were no trillion-dollar companies before this, ever. This is and it wasn't just Apple. It was essentially, at the end of 2020, this is January 2020, the entire, the most valuable companies in the world, the commanding heights of the global economy, were all tech companies, all West Coast tech companies, most of them in San Francisco, a couple in Seattle. But and they all were trillion-dollar companies. I mean, eventually Facebook did go up and down in that, but that snapshot is basically, it's a crazy thing in 25 years to happen this. But it wasn't just the tech world, corporate profits broadly kind of took off like that. And here's another one that was that when we came out with this piece, the Dow was at 5,000. And there were people and we were kind of caught up in this group that we were saying it's not out of the question that the stock market could get to 30,000 in this 20,000. And in fact, and people thought we were nuts at the time. They just thought, you are insane. And of course, we hit it to 30,000. And by the way, it still set records. So anyhow, this was good for everybody. The reason I'm kind of saying this is there's some ways to apply the insights. Like, how do we kind of make those calls? Well, one of the ways we were able to make those calls is there are some insights into technology that people here are more familiar with. If I talk to other businesses, I have to explain this more. But essentially, if you take the classic technology adoption curve, which all successful technologies go through, there's a key piece about this is understanding where the tipping point is. When does it go from a thing that was like, it kind of works, but who knows, to kind of the real deal? And this is particularly a way to focus about this is before the tipping point, people always look at the technology and say, it's a cell phone thing, it doesn't work, it kind of glitchy and the whole thing, I can't even figure it out. Until then you get an iPhone and it's like, oh my God, this is awesome. And then it takes off and everyone's amazed, and then they forget about how skeptical they were up until then. But this happens again and again. The other thing about it is in terms of the systems built around technologies, is people will always hang on to the old way of doing stuff in the old technology because I know it, I don't want to change, I've been, whatever, I'm making money in this, however it is. And then there'll be a new technology or something, and people are like, oh, that's interesting, but, I'm not changing. There'll be enough people that adopt that new technology. Let's say like the Uber, you can actually call a car to you and it comes here and boom, it's all good. It's like, and everyone says, oh my God, it's so much better. Boom, and the whole thing shifts. These paradigm shifts happen quick, really quick. And in fact, we're in the midst of a bunch of them right now. And so that's why I'm kind of reminding you techies about how this has happened before. Now, the defining feature of the next 25 years, there's been a debate for a while, but I don't think, to my mind, is a debate in the same way, is climate change. And it has its own tipping points here. I just want to kind of point out, and this is going to structure the next 25 years, without question. And the reason I want to lay out some of the basics of this. One thing is, just to drive home this point, is human beings, carbon in the atmosphere, the carbon that captures the heat of the planet and raises the heat of the planet, it's carbon in the atmosphere. Human beings, like with our brains, Homo sapiens, our brains, our bodies arrived about 300,000 years ago on this chart. This is essentially charting CO2 of the atmosphere. As you can see, what happened is when we got to the Industrial Revolution and figured out how to dig out coal and then oil and put it, burn it and put it in the air, boom, that's why that thing went up so far. The other up and down, by the way, are ice ages, so there is some natural oscillation in that. But what is clear is human beings have, we've never lived on a planet with this much carbon in it, and it's going in the direction that's going to get worse. So this is the kind of thing we're up against. This is essentially what has happened over the last, basically the Industrial Revolution, is who's put carbon into the atmosphere. And you can see the latecomers here, China and India, are essentially putting more and more in. But what's interesting about this is what's going on with the United States and Europe, because we are essentially figured out how to keep growing the economy, but flatlining it with our putting carbon into the atmosphere. In fact, it's really quite interesting, which is right now, the advanced economies, US and Europe, think of it, and Japan, are essentially putting about as much carbon in the atmosphere as we used to back in the 70s. We've peaked it. We understand how to bring it down as a way of kind of driving more efficiencies, and various things have gotten us this far. But what we're trying to do as a planet, essentially, is to figure out, how to bring it all the way down, get the entire world to drive it down, peak, and then bring it down. And that's what we hear on all this COP gatherings. There's one that's going to be in November here. I think it's in Kazakhstan, actually. But anyhow, that's what's driving that thing. Now, the reason I'm kind of saying that's kind of the context. But here's what's the amazing thing that's happening is clean energies are essentially starting to hit the same kind of phenomena that basically digital technologies did. And for some good reasons, like solar in particular is very similar to a computer chip. So there's a lot of kind of things we learned about computer chips we can apply to solar. So what's happened is the cost of, just like I showed you the gigabytes coming down, basically the cost of solar has dramatically dropped. A lot of the biggest drops were in the 70s, but essentially it has gotten down to super cheap. And in fact, and continuing to go. There is other ways to measure this, which is more interesting, which is just in the last 10 years, we've essentially dropped the price of electricity from solar by close to 90%. And now this is a thing called levelized cost of energy, meaning basically for the lifetime of the technology, if you built something, what would it cost? And because solar, once you build it, doesn't need to be fed coal every month and oil every month or natural gas every month, this is by far the cheapest way to create electricity now. And so no one is building coal plants, period. They are in the third world and stuff, developing world, in China a little bit. But essentially, in the United States, nobody's doing that because it just doesn't make any sense. And these costs are continuing to come down because it's a technology, and about every time you double the number of solar panels in terms of being produced, you go about a 20% reduction of cost. This is a common thing. It's understood in manufacturing processes. Anyhow, what's happened is because of that thing, solar is hitting this hockey stick. And if you just take the last year I had here, it's, boom, we're just taking off with this. We're watching, there has been, particularly through the US, just had the IRA, which is really a kind of $350 billion from the federal government to basically stimulate the acceleration of climate-related technologies. Anyhow, that is, there was a kind of a default way we thought we were going, which is the red, but essentially we do think now we can actually hit 100% clean energy by 2035, sorry. That's doable now in ways that before we didn't know how we were going to pull this off. It's some fascinating things here. Oops, let me do one more here. There we go. It's not just the public sector doing this. This is private sector money. Look at this, the last numbers here. Basically, we've gotten over $1 trillion now. Is private money. This has nothing to do with the government telling you what to do. Boom, smart money's moving to this. Basically, that green there is basically the auto industry. Got $350 billion of investment last year, and basically, or in 22, and basically that red is solar. It's like global finance is kind of moving towards it now. And there's two routes to clean energy. I mean, including nuclear is essentially a clean energy. And you know, in your industry now, we're starting to have to think, maybe we need to go back to that. But one of the reasons it's stalled for a bunch of reasons, but that is essentially since the 60s, the trajectory of essentially nuclear. But this is a trajectory of not just solar, but essentially non-hydro renewables, which means wind. And if you were a betting person, like someone going to put your money on it, which one would you go at? What do you think they're going? Now, there might be some renaissance of some nuclear, and I think that's actually a good thing in many ways. But anyhow, the point is, follow the hockey stick. Same thing's happening with batteries, basically. Lithium-ion battery prices basically have just dramatically dropped. Battery costs have fallen about 100%. In the last 30 years. It's just look at these numbers there. You can see right there where it is. By the way, these continue to fall. These are not like, oh, you hit the bottom. No. But because of that, we're watching the global electric vehicle industry scaling. 17% of all new car sales in the world now are electric. 17%. You know, we think, and the rest of the world is kicking our ass on it, frankly, from the U.S. point of view. But the American market, even that, is actually hitting stride. Now, we're about at 9% last year in terms of 9% of new car sales. By the way, in California, it's 25%. In San Francisco, it's about 50% of new car sales are basically electric now. But so electric cars, as kind of new cars being sold here. Norway, for example, now, which is an oil country, by the way, it has basically got it up to about 90% of all new cars, or 100% batteries, not even hybrids. And you're seeing how the rest of the world lines up there. You see the U.S. kind of banging around the bottom there. So there is a kind of sense of whether we will, this is projecting it out, how it probably will essentially push back the development and the building of internal combustion. Not just because it's, by the way, it's because they're going to be absolutely the cheapest cars out there are going to be batteries. Cars, just no doubt about it. In fact, one of the reasons we're putting tariffs on the Chinese cars is they've already got cars now, super good cars for 20 grand. And we're actually stopping them from coming to the country so we can get our own kind of industry, get this shit together. But basically, it's like you can't build internal combustion engine cars for that. And so anyhow, so we are heading into a boom, an economic boom around clean tech. But there's these other two here too. I want to circle back briefly to AI, although tomorrow you got a big, or maybe later today, you got a big AI talk. So they told me not to spend a lot of time on AI, but it's such a big deal. I just want to give a couple things here, which are truly transformative. We're really now having to rethink everything in the light of AI. The new way forward, I call it the new way forward with AI. And we're just beginning it, by the way. We're just starting this little journey with these kind of relatively crude machines that are eventually going to be super smart. Anyhow, one thing that you guys have been part of, we couldn't have done AI till now. And I want to kind of just put this in context. And you play a part of this story, which is why I'm doing this fast here. First of all, we had to ramp up we couldn't have done this in 1980. We had to get much more powerful computer chips. So we spent 40 years doing that. I laid out how that happened. Then we had to connect everything, not just person, to the internet. So we spent a lot of time doing that, and we've been doing that, the Internet of Things and all that. Then we had to digitize all our data. Believe it or not, in 1980, there was like 7% of all data was digital. I mean, it's analog. And so we had to get everything digitized. Then, and this is you guys, had to get it all to the cloud. And by the way, I've done business audiences for 15 years. I was kind of how many cloud conferences could you have? But it took 15 years for businesses to kind of make that migration into the cloud. And then I would add that we probably had to have these really super prosperous tech companies to put billions of dollars into the research of this. No one else was doing it. The U.S. government wasn't doing it. But Google and that was just throwing money at this stuff because they had so much money. And only then could you do AI. But the one way to think about this, by the way, is one, the part you guys play in this, but AI doesn't need another 20 years for infrastructure, 40 years of infrastructure. It's ready to go. So it's going to move fast. This, unlike a lot of things, which, the cloud, it's going to take whatever, 15, 20 years to kind of pull that off. This is a different animal. It's ready to go, it's going. This is why it's kind of off the races. Now, there's two ways to think about this. I just want to do it, and I know you're going to get a more technical thing on AI coming up here. But all technologies go through two stages. One is the foundational infrastructure stage, which, by the way, you guys are part of. So go back to the car revolution. The first 40 years of figuring out, the Model T Ford was, let's say, 1908, right? So at the beginning of 1910 there, basically we had to, what is the car company? Oh, what's a gas station? Oh, we have someone has to drill oil. Where are we going to drill oil? I mean, where is a gas station? Okay, somebody's going to do it in every neighborhood, right? Then once you get that, which is after the war, then you can figure out, well, what can you do with this car in the hands of everybody? And that's when we totally reinvented America and, the world too, the suburbs, malls, fast food, drive-ins, all that kind of stuff. Because then anyone could do it. You didn't have to be a kind of a geek, kind of drilling oil kind of thing. We're in that exact situation now here, folks. If you think of AI as the culmination of the digital revolution. So we spent the last 40 years, this has been my career, like figuring out what's a PC, what's the internet, what's the mobile phone, what's the cloud. And now that that's kind of up and all working, now it's like, oh, what can you do with AI? Well, you can do executive assistants and, autonomous cars, all that stuff. I'll touch on a few of those. But so that's what's in the hands of everybody now. People are going to go nuts. They're going to go nuts with AI. Basically, there's going to be an entrepreneur taking AI and applying it to everything, basically, which is, you guys are going to win under any scenario because they're going to need data, they're going to need data centers for this. But anyhow, the point being, the second thing I think you got to understand and why this is such a big deal is the entire history of computers since mainframe has essentially been how do you interact with that computer power, or how do you interact with the data behind that computer power? And at first, the mainframe days, you had to have these arcane command line things and, punch cards. I mean, some people as old as me, I actually remember I've done punch cards back when I was a kid, right? Anyhow, the point is, that was hard. PCs made them a little easier. Oh, we can use icons and stuff. The web said, oh, you do a link and it'll get to something, but people didn't know how to code it as well, although HTML is easier. Mobile is like, oh, apps, make it more and more accessible. But here's the deal. The Holy Grail has always been talking to computers. Always. And it always will be. It's the optimal way to interact with this technology. Just like it's the optimal way to talk about. I'm talking to you, right? Humans are geared to talking. Jean-Luc Picard said, 300 years in the future, Jean-Luc Picard, what does he do with the computer? He says, computer, ask to that. Computer, do that. We hit it. We're across that threshold. That is the game changer, and it's opening it up basically for everybody. So, a few little things quick. You're going to see everybody is going to get a personal assistant. For everyone meaning, well, maybe everyone, but I would say certainly knowledge workers. This is like within the next couple of years, by the way. This is not future. There's a lot of people working on this. It's a little clunky now, and there'll be agents, and so they'll be able to go out in a million different directions for you. And so one way to think about this is you who might have some expertise, so let's say you're a tech guy, but jack shit about, global politics or globalism, you're going to be surrounded by essentially PhD grad level intelligent agents who can go in any direction for you and can tell you anything. We already kind of do it if you ask Perplexity or OpenAI, ChatGPT, or whichever one you do. We're getting the early version of this, but essentially then they're going to go actually do stuff for you, like an intern could, like a grad level intern could for you. And they're just going to be able to do an unbelievable amount of stuff for you. And so many people are talking about the productivity level. Economists, serious economists. I've had them in my talks or my gatherings. Many are thinking we could maybe even double the productivity rate of humans or knowledge workers, and would punch up the growth rate of the country. And so there's a crew that is starting to think, hey, are we actually going to be another Roaring 20s? By the way, the Roaring 20s of the actual original one was essentially driven by the introduction of all those general purpose technologies, electricity, basic auto industry with internal combustion, and a few others like that, radio. But anyhow, so boom, the thing went booming. And I'm saying, if it's not just this decade, it'll roll into the 30s too. But anyhow, we have a lot of growth potential ahead of us. Another quick one too, I just want to say is if you take those same basically intelligent assistants, they could actually be personal tutors for everyone. This is a very serious thing. Asal Khan, with Khan Academy guy, is already up to his eyeballs in this stuff. He thinks it's going to revolutionize education. He has a good book on this, by the way, if you want to read it. Anyone who has kids should absolutely wrap their head around this thing. Because basically what's happening is essentially we've known for a long time, without the AI, that tutors dramatically change the learning, accelerate the learning on anyone. So this is kind of the curve. Everyone here in this room went through school like this. Like, this is the curve. You know, a few kids are brilliant, kids in the middle kind of fumbling around with the idea, a bunch of people failing on the other end. But here's what happens. You can take, and this has been done with human tutors over and over again since the 80s. They realize you can take a kid on the bottom of the class, or certainly in the middle of the class, and you can move them to the top 5% of the class just by putting an individual tutor to them. So the curve goes like that. And so if you can automate that, which is what's happening here, you could actually move everybody, accelerate learning. And so there's a whole way I talk about this. If we had more time, I could go into that. The third one I just want to say, and these are little signs you already started to see about this, is driverless cars. And you're in Phoenix, which is one of the few places that has driverless cars. Basically, San Francisco and Phoenix are the two that are pioneering this. I mean, it's pioneered by Waymo and Silicon Valley companies, but essentially, you can actually ride it here. Just download the app, Waymo, and kind of run around Phoenix if you want here. But basically, people are like, oh, I'll never let a robot drive a car. It's like, well, compared to what? I mean, kind of 42,000 Americans get killed in car accidents every year. And it's not just, there's the drunk guy coming out of the bar. There's this falling asleep after work. I mean, whatever. We're horrible drivers. And in fact, up until now, autonomous vehicles haven't killed anyone. Now, there's not the same scale of numbers, but it's really powerful, actually. And here, by the way, is me. I videoed this thing. This is me. Like I say, in San Francisco right now, every inch of San Francisco you can go, except the freeway right now. Actually, they're opening that up now to get to the airport. But basically, every inch, 24/7 in San Francisco now, you can do it. This is me in the back seat just showing it. That's, by the way, that's Waymo in front of it there. For those who haven't kind of seen these things, it does have a different way on top to kind of look at. It has LiDAR radars and various things. But anyhow, this is being championed by many different companies now, and this is going to happen, folks. And it's going to have a lot of implications around this, but it's also going to, use a lot of data. So, boom, you guys win under every scenario, basically. All right, now I'm going to basically touch a little bit on bioengineering. It's not as important, but it also does have to do with AI, because one of the things is AI in conjunction with our new understanding of bioengineering is going to drive a lot of boom here. One is for those techies who probably don't tune into the side of the bio side of the tech. Basically, it took $3 billion to crack the first human genome. In about 2003, we finally did it after 15 years. It took $3 billion to get one genome cracked. Basically, by 2020, it was down to $1,000. Anyone in this room could do it. And right now, it's about $200. In this decade, by the end of the decade, it'll be like $100, $50. And basically, everyone will have them. And so anyhow, that is, by the way, is twice as fast as Moore's Law's kind of cost difference for a bunch of reasons. The second thing which people have to realize is we're learning how to engineer biology. And this is just a quick thing, is in 2014-15 was when we cracked this thing called CRISPR, which is we understood how to cheaply and easily basically edit the genome of any genome, including our own, by the way, although it's taboo right now. But basically, this is just an example of how the money started to flood into it as a kind of example. I was just using it as an example. Boom, people figured that out. And so we're entering a thing of what we call synthetic biology. We're going to be able to engineer biology. We're going to engineer living things. We're going to we understand how the biology works, we understand how the genome works, we understand even deeper how the proteins work and all the different things down the track here. And so what you're going to actually start to see is products being grown rather than essentially built in the traditional industrial way, which, has a lot of pollution, a lot of different issues with that, kind of a lot of waste, actually. But anyhow, here's one thing that's going to probably drive it, because of that overarching climate thing, which is going to drive a lot of stuff, whether you like it or not, however you think about it, it's just going to drive a lot. Basically, beef is hugely impactful on the climate. If you see here, by the way, if you are meat eaters, chicken and pigs are a lot less impact on greenhouse gas. But anyhow, the point is, because of that, there's a lot of interest in how could we take the cells from a cow, put it and essentially make what they call cultured meat. And you've seen a little bit of this around chicken. It's starting to happen with beef. But essentially, you take that cell from the living cow, you put it in a vat, you give it the amino acids and all the different things that the cow would get roaming around, chewing grass for like years. But essentially, you do it in a very accelerated fashion with energy in a vat. And essentially, you grow those cultured cells into essentially the same meat. And it tastes like the same meat. It is the same meat. It's just grown in a different way, a much more efficient way. Now, the costs have to come down on that, and it's not super available, although you can get the chicken nuggets like this now, and there are chefs even working on it. Anyhow, the point being is it's not the question, we're going to see that kind of cultured meat slicing it over time till the 2040s here. I'm kind of pointing this out as one example. I'm just saying that's an example of synthetic biology. Now, and there's a bunch of stuff, by the way, on the medical front on that. Now, we're going to go a little faster here because there's a few other things I just want to throw at you. And my piece goes into this. And when I do this talk to senior execs all the time, they want to know these pieces too, beyond the technology. One is America is going through an unbelievably big generational shift right now. And essentially, and it's, your workers or lack of workers. I know you're having a hard time getting people to work, getting into your industry. But anyhow, basically, if you go to 2020 here, this is the generations of America, basically by the numbers, basically. And one thing you're going to see here is the shaded out things have a lot less to do with the economy. Basically, it's the people in that middle part are the workers, are the consumers. They buy stuff. That's where the action is, basically. And as you can already see here, is the baby boom generation. In 2020, it was already split in terms of retirement, and also why those numbers are going down is they're dying, basically. The millennial, if you push it out to 2030, all the boomers are, technically retired, and basically they're going off that exit cliff there. And basically, the millennials and the Gen Z, which is a generation right behind them, are essentially, and aligned in a lot of their values, by the way. Whatever they want to do, we're going to do, basically. This is the thing you got to wrap your head around, the forward motion of this kind of stuff. And so by 2050, the 25 years I'm talking about here is essentially whatever going to be driven by those two generations. And increasing, by the way, the boomers are, they'll be hanging on there in 2050. A few of them, I hope I'll be one of them. I'm a back-end boomer. But basically, the point is, that's shifting. Already, though, folks, this is the American workforce right now. Silent generation, that's Joe Biden's generation, by the way. He's now leaving the workforce, so he's gone. Boomers are going down. Gen X, many of you I can see are Gen X here. Thank God for you. You're holding the ship kind of steady while we kind of do this. And then there's the millennials. The biggest number of folks in the workforce now are millennials. That little dip, by the way, is just the pandemic thing. But here's the thing. Gen Z is now, there are as many Gen Zs in the workforce as boomers. And which trend do you want to go on that one? Who's going to be more influential? It's Gen Z, right? So anyhow, point is, good little thing to just wrap your head around. New majorities, the other thing going on by this country that I think is those two generations, the millennial and Gen Zs, are essentially 50-50 white and people of color, just roughly. First time in American history, there's been nothing close to this. And so there's been two booms of immigration. There's been the late 19th century, early 20th century. We understand that well. The one that started in the 80s, including with Reagan and others, this is a bipartisan thing of immigration's good. We basically brought in a lot of folks, and that even more folks from in terms of sheer numbers into the country. And so what's happening now, and that's, by the way, legal immigration too. That's not like the illegal immigration stuff. And this is so what's happening now in the United States is essentially as a percentage. Since the 60s, we're seeing the number of people of color going up, which brings the number of white people down. And so basically, by about 2045, they're thinking now, whites will be a minority in the whole country. By the way, this happened in California about 15 years ago, and whites now in California are about 35% of the population. Awesome place to live. I live there. I wouldn't trade it. So it's not dramatically different. But I would just tell you, this is happening. And it's just playing out. And it's not. And the other thing I think you want to understand is this is something people don't realize is in 65, there were only 10% of the population was had a college education, and now you're watching it, it's close to 40%. And if you take the younger generation, like millennials, they're about 60%. So this is a different change of the demographics, it's a change of what's going. This is surfacing in politics. I'm not going to go into a kind of a partisan thing or anything right now, particularly how touchy everything is. But I will say this, which as we kind of wind out here, is that America goes through swings in its politics in a healthy way. And we saw kind of a progressive era off World War II where, there was, there's more egalitarian interests, it was higher taxes of the rich, it was more public infrastructure, putting money into public infrastructure, that kind of era, which you well know. We just have kind of experienced a conservative era. It started with Ronald Reagan and Thatcher and otherwise in Europe and that kind of stuff. And I would argue there's a debate here, and we're kind of in the middle of it kind of thing, but I would say in many respects, that era there's many things about that. You would be cautious about banking on that thing is going to continue in terms of the future, in terms of how everything gets run. And I say I would at least open yourselves up to there will be some kind of different era here that might have more, again, a more egalitarian politics and more kind of state involvement and regulation, various things like that, particularly around climate change. Now, the reason I want to just point this out is this isn't some partisan thing. This has happened throughout American history. American history is basically, and I'm going to run you down here, but I want to just remind you, we go through these 40-year cycles and have since the very beginning. There was essentially a 40-year reinvention of America coming off the Revolutionary War. There was a reinvention around a kind of more populist kind of backlash to that, which was Andrew Jackson and others. It kind of went to the war. Then there was a kind of reinvention of America around the Civil War and the post-war world there. Then there was a reinvention around the early, what they called the progressive era, was Teddy Roosevelt and, Woodrow Wilson. Both parties, by the way, both parties playing these games. It's just the kind of zeitgeist of the era. Then there was a reinvention around the Great Depression, World War II, post-war world, coming off FDR. Then there was a reinvention around the Reagan Revolution, and kind of even Dems kind of went more into market-oriented kind of thinking around that kind of stuff. Something is going to happen now. I don't know what. It doesn't mean exactly 2020, but this next era, I think we're going to see another configuration around that. Stay open. These things always, these junctures always bring great tension, great polarization, passionate politics. I mean, in one of them we had a civil war, 600,000 Americans died. I mean, they can get bad. That's the worst, obviously. But I'm saying this is a common thing. Stakes are high. New technologies are opening up new things. Old things are collapsing. A lot of passion. So that's one lens to see this through, as America does get through these things. And ultimately, I would say the final push, this last little bit here, is this is happening all over the world. This thing is not just an American thing. And I know we got 17 countries here, but there has been an interesting kind of battle between democracies and autocracies, or totalitarian areas and things like that has gone since the beginning of America, basically. And all those junctures I just talked to you about, American junctures of transformation, have actually ended up with some kind of leap forward globally, like around 1900, the progressive era, boom, expansion of democracies. There was another one around after World War II, boom, it expanded a bit. And then after the kind of the 1980 there, fall of the Berlin Wall, boom, it expanded. So there has been this upward trajectory. But what I will say to end this little talk here is that China is now, in the game here. And if I had more time, I could talk a lot. I was a foreign correspondent in China. I was there in Tiananmen Square, all that kind of stuff. I know a lot about China. But I will say this about that in AI. There are two AI superpowers in the world right now, only two. And it's the US and it's China. And they have very different ways of thinking about AI. There has been this interesting race. China wasn't even in the game until about 2015, but basically they started throwing themselves at supercomputers, which is essentially another proxy for AI and kind of the advanced computing. And that's the US there kind of giving up some space there. Chip manufacturing, you saw a lot of stuff about this. This again has started since the turn of the 20 years ago here. We're kind of neck and neck on that, and we're clawing back some of that because it's a kind of vulnerability. And I would say this matters because AI, this powerful new tool that basically is the foundational tool of the, for centuries defense. There is one way to use it. If you use it for totalitarian kind of top-down kind of way of doing it, that could really be a kind of one kind of world. And then you could do it in a kind of what I would say is more the US and the Western version, which is a little crazier, but it's kind of bottom-up approach. It gets nutty, it gets crazy. People kind of, all the stuff that's happening in our politics now. But generally, it's an open, a process I think is healthier. And so I would just But I'm an optimist here, I want to say. I don't think we're necessarily going to go into a necessary Cold War there, but I would put this out there. It's going to be a big, interesting next 25 years here. I believe it's going to be a positive thing. I believe we're going to see this great era of progression. I think we're going to basically watch the early days. Remember, this is the earliest days. This is the dumbest you're ever going to see AI is right today, and it's going to get better tomorrow, and it's going to be twice really good in a year, and in 10 years it's going to be even amazing. So anyhow, the point is we're just starting this AI age. We're just starting this clean energy age. Once we get abundant, vastly abundant, cheap, clean energy, you can do a crazy amount of stuff with basically clean, abundant energy with no thinking, oh, it's going to screw the planet up, which is coming. And then we're going to actually get to this point where we can bioengineer a much more sustainable world, I would argue. And so I think we're going to make the transition from that world, which is kind of running, kind of falling apart at some level, or kind of seen its day, better days, did a lot of great stuff. And I think we're going to basically watch this thing kind of take some kind of sense of kind of what's going to come, basically, whereas we figure this thing out on the fly. How does this all work? And I think people in 50, 100, 1,000 years from now, they're going to look back and say, early that kind of 20th, first century, that's when they finally figured out AI. That's when they broke their threshold and kind of figured out AI. And then they're going to say, that's when they finally figured out how to do kind of clean energy so that they could just make super amounts of clean energy and didn't kind of blow up the planet. And they're going to say, that's when they started to bioengineer life, which is kind of how we still do things now, and it all works, and we're all in sync with nature. And they'll say, wouldn't that be amazing to have been back at that time, in that early, let's say 2025 to 2050? Wouldn't it have been an amazing thing to live at that life and be part of what's that great progression? And I'll say to you folks here, folks, you are here. It is now, and in fact, let's make the most of this moment, and you folks are playing a big role in this. And so I'd say for the kickoff, your basically conference here is go nuts, everybody. So thank you for this. And this is how to get a hold of me. Through my websites, my company website. And here's the last thing I'll just say is I write a Substack, which is getting to be the real intellectual hive out there. You can find me on Substack, and I write it under the Great Progression, and I'm going to be doing a book version of this, I think, coming in 2025. So if you're really interested in these ideas, follow me. I don't know if we have time for that.
Let's see, if you have a question, please step up to the mic, give your name and company name, please. Over here, we have one here.
Hey, great talk, really interesting. My name is Mike from TriStar, Mike Petrides. I just have a question. You had a pie chart up there that had, people that knew a lot about geopolitics and other people that knew about other things, and these AI assistants would help them, right, understand, I guess, things they don't understand.
Yeah.
So in that, how are we supposed to know what is truth? And there's only one constraint I want to put on that. You can't just say, trust me. So how do we know what is truth with those AI robots?
Good question. I know that's a big issue right now, particularly around the early days of social media. I would say right now, think about it from the big picture of a historical perspective. We're in a very relatively early nascent stage of social media. We're still figuring it out. And I think even with social media as it is now, regardless of AI, we're actually figuring out, okay, how to understand this better and better. Now, it's still a problem. We don't have it cracked. But I'm saying, I think what's going to happen, and I think particularly the AI is going to help us sort out what is true from at least your perspective. I mean, there might be some totally different perspectives on what truth is, and you might be tailored to them. But I do think there's a way that actually we can use this incredible tool with this unbelievable reach and its instantaneous application to actually counter this in ways that right now it's like we're waiting for some, fact checker from, some place to say, hey, wait, that's not right, or we're all kind of trying to figure it out through Snopes or something. That's a crude kind of early day kind of way of like, hey, how do we deal with this? But I think it's a big issue, but not that's going to shut the game down. And I think it's something we're just going to figure out. There's going to be like thousands of these little iterations of like, okay, how are we going to deal with this stuff around AI particularly? But this has happened with every general purpose technology, by the way. Electricity came around and people said, yeah, but if you touch it, it's going to electrocute you. It's like, yeah, but we figured out our ways to figure that out. Now here we have all this, people see, fire, it's like some dude in the initial campfire, who first fire guy was saying, hey, it burned my hand. Let's, forget about this fire. And then everyone's saying, are you kidding, dude, man? look what it does to this meat. It's awesome. This meat's awesome. Keeps the wolves away. It's fucking warm. Are you nuts? We'll figure out a way to deal with the dangers of it. So I think it's kind of with AI too. It's like, we're going to figure this stuff out, and, that will be one thing we'll have to figure out. I don't know if we have another
question here.
Yes, you talk about clean energy. I know that's a goal.
Yeah.
But data centers are consuming more and more and more power, and clean energy isn't going to power that.
Yeah.
How are we going to power it?
Yeah, well, I kind of, my little icon there, you saw it was actually a nuclear little thing. I mean, if I had more time here, I would talk about, I would have brought up the idea of energy. We're thinking about smaller nukes now. They're actually much safer. They're basically things that I think people, because of the demands of AI, I think they're actually people are going to come around to nuclear. We got to do nuclear. Also space, by the way, space travel is going to need nuclear. Humans are going to need to figure out nuclear. I'm not an anti-nuke thing. I think that was we should have developed it. But I think the big plants, those things are going to kind of go away. I think it's going to be a smaller. And the final thing is there is a possibility of fusion energy, and we are making much progress on that. And it won't really hit a big part of this 2025, but I think this century we'll have fusion energy, which is even more cheap and more abundant and more safe.
So the issue is we have 40 plus years where we've been demonizing the atom.
Yeah.
We've been teaching our kids, we've been teaching society.
Agreed.
And we have to unravel 40 years
Yes.
of every nuclear reactor is a Chernobyl event. So
Agreed.
we have to, even with SMRs, we have to overcome that. We have to re-educate people.
Yeah, well, nothing educates people as financial incentive. So, I'm telling you, everyone at Microsoft, at Google, a lot of them are kind of generally a more progressive kind of, thinking, liberal kind of thinking folks. But essentially, once they realize they need it for the energy, they're like, hey, let's redo 3 Mile Island, So I think the new incentives are going to change that dynamic. And I think it's a good thing. I'm with you. I think we should have developed that technology.
Well, there's a number of questions on the screen. Those of you who have these questions, try to catch Peter as he goes in through the hallway here. Peter, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, folks.
Peter. So Peter's a pretty busy guy, as you could tell. He's actually flying out to Chicago, has to make a speech there. But he's not too busy to support the Survivors Alliance, who has a mission to unite and empower survivors of slavery and human trafficking around the world. So Peter, in appreciation for the keynote address, inspiring, educational, really out there kind of talk, on behalf of the board of directors and our audience, we'd like to present the Survivors Alliance a check for $5,000 in your name.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. These guys are great.
Peter.
Oh.
Which way?
Oh, that's right. Fantastic. These are a great group. They're working with the survivors of human trafficking. Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. I had no idea you were doing that. Thank you. Appreciate it.